Martin, we've had a rare appearance from the Director General of MI6 this week. Can you just put people in the picture? What is MI6? We know there's a great big building just next to Vauxhall Bridge on the south side there. It looks like something out of the Lord of the Rings, some kind of spooky tower. But what does MI6 actually do?
Well, it's hard to know because they're supposedly secret. And so, I mean, in the past, we wouldn't have even known who the head of MI6 was. So the fact that he's going out there and doing PR for the organisation is a bit of a development, because in the past, of course, they were just in the shadows and nobody knew who they were.
These are the people that run the James Bonds of the world. But how like James Bond are they, really?
Well, I mean, the fact is that MI6 doesn't have a reputation. It's got a reputation of being very devious and extremely effective at what it does, but at the same time, outside Britain, it's not regarded as an entirely, how can I put it, an entirely positive institution. Well, in the Middle East, for example, it's regarded as a terrorist supporting infrastructure, which of course it is.
Even in the UK, it gets quite a bit of criticism too.
Well, indeed, especially in places like Northern Ireland, where they had their fingerprint very prominently displayed. The idea.
So what was the connection with MI6?
Well, I mean, there was a turf war between MI6 and MI5 about whether it was a foreign country, in which case MI6 would take primacy, or whether it was internal, in which case MI5 would take primacy. I understand at one stage they were grassing each other's agents up so that they could be assassinated. That's how bad the relationship sometimes became between those two organisations.
So this chap by the name of Alex Younger is now the Director General. What do you know about him?
Hardly anything. What we do know is Scarlett, who used to head it up. If you remember, we never used to know who these people were. I mean, he's basically a retired head of MI6, and he's come out and said, well, Jeremy Corbyn can't be Prime Minister because he's a security risk. And I think I was saying, hang on a minute. We pay your wages, you're a civil servant, effectively, and you think that you can come out with stuff like that. And, of course, it's what's been uncovered this week, that things funded by the Foreign Office under the table, based in Scotland, have basically been Twitter trolls out there attacking Corbyn as being a puppet of Putin. And that they justify that as being their war against Putin's infiltration of our society. And in actual fact, what it actually turns out to be is the usual thing they get up to, which is slagging off the Labour leadership and trying to prevent them win elections in this country.
You mean that maybe even taxpayers' money's been being spent on trying to undermine Corbyn? How on earth is that allowed?
Well, the Labour MPs have been, because it came out through a leak, yeah? And the Labour MPs have been pretty annoyed about it, but it's hardly surprising. They've been doing that for years. The Zinoviev letter, which undermined the first Labour government, was an MI6 plant. It was just just disinfo, and it helped to bring down the first Labour government, because the security services basically serve the establishment, and their role is basically to prevent social change in Britain and elsewhere in the world.
So secret Scottish-based, I'll put a link up to this on our show page, a secret Scottish-based office led information warfare attack on Labour and Jeremy Corbyn. Explosive leaked documents passed to the Sunday Mail. This is the dailyrecord.co.uk in Scotland website. Reveal the organisation's Integrity Initiative is funded with £2 million of Foreign Office cash and run by military intelligence specialists.
Indeed, and of course the speech she made at St Andrews, the head of MI6 this week, was saying, well, we've got to, it's fourth generation intelligence warfare. The Russians are trying to steer elections and control our infrastructure and this, that and the other, and we need more resources to fight this. And in fact what he's doing is he's telling us what MI6 gets up to, and then saying that the Russians are doing that. So
a secret UK government-funded infowars unit based in Scotland sent out social media posts attacking Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party. On the surface, the cryptically named Institute for Statecraft is a small charity operating from an old Victorian mill in Fife. You couldn't make it up, could you? This sounds like something from the Avengers. But explosive leaked documents passed to the Sunday Mail reveal the organisation's Integrity Initiative is funded £2 million of Foreign Office cash, among by these military intelligence officers. The think tank is supposed to counter Russian online propaganda by forming clusters of friendly journalists and key influencers throughout Europe who use social media to hit back against Russian disinformation. But their investigations found worrying evidence the shadowy programme's official Twitter account has been used just to attack Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party and their officials. One tweet quotes a newspaper article calling Corbyn a useful idiot that goes on to state his open, visceral anti-Westernism has helped the Kremlin cause.
Well, there you are. You see, they justify this to themselves in, we've got to have £2 million of your money, folks, to be spent trying to counter Russian propaganda online. But, of course, they don't come out and say, we've been funded by the British government to do it. They basically pretend to be people they're not. This is what's really pernicious about it. They don't say we're the Institute for Statecraft and we're funded by the Foreign Office.
You know what Alex Younger will say? Well, the Russians are doing it, so we
do you know what the Russians would say? We don't waste our money on stuff like that. We've got a proper intelligence services which is bugging your phones. So that's when they got the telephone intercept between Catherine Ashton and Umas Piets, where Umas Piets, the Estonian foreign minister, told Catherine Ashton, in actual fact, the snipers in the Maidan Square are associated with the new regime, and
This is Ukraine.
This is in Ukraine. The Russians concentrate on old-fashioned tradecraft. It's the boondoggle in the West now is that everything is psychological warfare, which becomes PR, which means all these ex-military people can then get government contracts to go out and be trolls on the internet. Nice work if you can get it. You're paid by the government to pretend to be somebody you're not, and generally try and influence opinion. But of course, the Russians don't waste their time on this stuff.
We've heard a bit about MI6, and we'll be hearing from Alex Younger in a minute, the Director General. What about MI5 and GCHQ, the other two large parts of the Secret Service here? We've heard just this last week, GCHQ have the power to legally hack anybody. So actually, hacking is a criminal offence, but GCHQ are immune. Earlier this year, we heard that MI5 is allowed to go around and commit criminal offences and has immunity. Now, presumably, almost certainly, this is some form of crown immunity that these people have got. So effectively, they're above the law.
Well, they always have been. The idea that they operated within the law is just a fantasy. They've never operated within the law, and of course their allies, the CIA, are famous drug traffickers and supporters of international terrorism.
So really they are what we might call the permanent government. Nobody elects these people, and they go for years and years and years. Governments come and go, but the people at the top echelons of these organisations continue on and on.
Well, that's why
public money.
Well, that's why Scarlett, who used to head up MI6, thinks it's in his job description as a retired head to decide who should and shouldn't be Prime Minister of the country. Now, of course, there's no constitutional basis for that at all, but it quite shows the mindset that they have. No, it's all very well you having elections, but we decide what happens, and I'm afraid Corbyn can't be elected.
So why haven't the Labour Party, why hasn't Jeremy Corbyn been making more this week of the Integrity Initiative, who's based at Gateside Mill near Ochtermurty, retweeted a newspaper report that said Milne is not a spy. That would be beneath him. And his strategy and communication director, Seamus Mill, has been also targeted by them. So why hasn't Jeremy Corbyn called this out? This is British taxpayers' money being spent on attacking the Labour Party and its leaders and its director of communication.
Well, I think various Labour MPs have called it out. I think Corbyn is trying to look prime ministerial and trying to stand above it.
You know what will happen
it's like
with
saying,
this?
well, of course they're doing that, but I don't care.
What will happen with this is this organisation will close down. You'll go there probably this weekend and find there's nobody at this mill, and in a couple of weeks' time it will pop up somewhere else under a different name.
That's right. This is how these things operate. There's a huge kind of privatised industry now of ex-military intelligence people who are basically PR wonks. Yeah, that's what psychological warfare is all about. Is Alistair Campbell in a uniform, and you've got it. And these guys have a sales pitch to governments. I mean, one of the things Cambridge Analytica said.
Just a minute, Alistair Campbell was the one. It's almost certain now was responsible for outing David Kelly to the national press, which then supposedly has caused him to commit suicide. So he was very, very much involved in that, and he should have been possibly even prosecuted after the inquest, which there was never any proper inquest into that particular death. Now, maybe that is because people like David Kelly, who are working for the Secret Services, are above the law and actually are outside the law. And when it looks as if there's some criminal offence involving them, everything is just brushed under the carpet.
Well, we know that this is what goes on. Cambridge Analytica's parent company did a sales pitch at Dicey a couple of years ago, which is a military sales expert. He said, "What could we do for you guys?" Well, we could run a false flag chemical weapons attack on London, which wouldn't be real, but we could convince people it was real, and then the government of the day on the back of that could then pursue any policy it wanted.
Well,
that was a presentation that they made.
That's shocking. Do you know? Can you source that?
It's already sourced. We can source it later and we put it on the show page.
Up on the show page at thisweek.org.uk. Anyway, before that, let's have a listen finally to... well, not finally, but we should get round to it at least. It's 17 minutes past 7 o'clock, and we should have been here 10 minutes ago, really. But anyway, fascinating discussion about the Secret Services and the law. Let's have a listen to the Director General of MI6, Alex Younger, talking here about Russia.
We face adversaries who now regard themselves as being in a state of perpetual confrontation. One of the most egregious examples of this was the attack in Salisbury, in which the Russian state used a military-grade chemical weapon on UK soil. We did not respond to this flagrant hostile act by emulating Russian tactics. Instead, we operationalized our values, our legal system, and our alliances. Our intention is for the Russian state to conclude that whatever benefits it thinks it is accruing from this activity, they are not worth the risk. We will do this in our way, according to our laws and our values. We will be successful nonetheless, and I urge Russia or any other state intent on subverting our way of life not to underestimate our determination and our capabilities, or those of our allies. We can do this to any opponent at any time.
Ooh, it's almost like a bit of a veiled threat there. But Martin, actually, he's really taking the moral high ground by saying, even after Salisbury, we've decided we are not going to retaliate.
Well, my own opinion is that MI6 are behind the Salisbury incident, so it's all crocodile tears, isn't it?
What evidence have you got for that?
Well, let's think about, if you think about it logically, who controls Salisbury? Is it the Russians or is it the British? Who controls Salisbury? So two guys supposedly got off a plane and went there the night before. They were smoking loads of dope in the hotel they were in, having noisy sex with prostitutes. They sound like a hit squad to you?
Well, if they were the hit squad, they may be a hit squad, or they may be an incompetent hit squad.
And if the Russians wanted Skripal dead, why would they use this so-called Novichok, which didn't actually kill them?
What it does is it paints a picture of the Russian intelligence as rather bungling.
Well, what it does is it's basically the whole thing is theatre, and including the death of the woman with the so-called Novichok perfume. The MI6 are quite capable of killing random people in order to make their point. They were involved in the Bologna bombing of 1980, according to the Italian police force. Western intelligence services, NATO, are terrorists. They were the ones who orchestrated the snipers in the Maidan Square that killed 80 protesters and several police officers. It wasn't the Yanukovych regime, it was our people. And the assassination of Zakharchenko in August this year was carried out with a bomb attack, which killed him and his bodyguard in a cafe. And all the evidence points to the Ukrainian Secret Service working with British intelligence for that assassination.
So how close are the British intelligence and special forces to what's going on in Ukraine?
Very close. We understand that Brigade 77 have been virtually moved lock, stock and barrel to Kiev. Well, Brigade 77, as they've told us about, is Britain's cyber warfare crew. And they've got 1,000 employees, all of whom are officers, so you can imagine the amount of money's been spent on this. They're not squaddies. And they spend all day online pretending to be people they're not, pushing anti-Russian propaganda about things like Skripal. That's exactly what they do, and we pay for that. And then it's presented as if there's all this opinion against Russia on internet, on social media. They're running it.
On publictechnology.net, Alex Younger is reported as calling for tech-enabled fourth-generation espionage. He says that digital technology has profoundly changed the work of his organisation, and he called for a new era of espionage that melds human and artificial intelligence. In that public address we heard a bit from earlier, he says, I do not expect our human intelligence role will ever change fundamentally. We will always need to understand the motivations, intentions and aspirations of people in other countries. Even in an era of AI, you need human intelligence. In fact, it will become an even more important in a more complex world. But he added that the rapid speed of technological development has been a key contributing factor to making the world a dramatically more complicated place. And he's really talking about investing in AI as part of MI6's toolkit.
Well, indeed. I mean, I think what's very interesting about his speech is he's basically giving you a prospectus of what MI6 actually do.
Well,
and they're basically glorified PR consultants who go out pretending to be, they create astroturf movements, they create a general atmosphere of anti-Russian hysteria, and of course that's what the Skripal incident is all about. And we've not spoken to Skripal or his daughter or the police officer who was supposedly involved. And we know we got a letter from the Times by one of the doctors in the hospital saying that nobody was treated for nerve gas poisoning in that hospital. 3 people were treated for poisoning, is what he said. It wasn't nerve gas.
Alex Younger claims the era of the 4th Industrial Revolution calls for a 4th-generation espionage. This, he says, will see human skills complemented by the power of new technologies. The work of the intelligence services evolving in 3 major ways. The first is that as countries' defences are being probed on multiple fronts at the same time, developing effective partnerships between organisations is the key to national security, involving greater collaboration with MI6, as well as working with other agencies across intelligence and law enforcement with our overseas allies. The second, he says, the second big change is the need to master covert action in the data age. When I joined SIS, he said our principal task was finding out secrets. In a world of hybrid threats, it's not enough to know what your adversary is doing. You must be able to take steps to change their behaviour. Well, this is clearly psychological warfare investment he's talking about here. The third challenge is for MI6 to overcome the need to ensure that technology is on our side, not that of our opponents.
Well, in other words, what he's saying is that what we're doing, is what we're accusing the Russians of doing, is we're setting up troll factories to try and influence public opinion.
Psychological warfare and cyber warfare.
Now, what the Russians do, and I think this is the Russians are blamed for doing the West. The West loves this colour revolution stuff, where we introduce a new phone app into Cuba, and then we get young people to criticise the government and all the rest of it. The Russians are aware of this is going on because they're on the receiving end of it. But you know what? They stick to traditional tradecraft. That phone call that they intercepted, as I mentioned earlier, between Umas Pierce and Catherine Ashton, that's what Secret Services are supposed to do. We've got your phone conversation, and we're now going to tell everybody what you're saying amongst yourself, because in actual fact the assasssations, the murders were carried. I know, but this is the difference between the Russian approach and their approach.
GCHQ is that this week they also brought out there was a report on Points West, which didn't go up on the BBC website. But what GCHQ were pointing out is that you may be buying smart toys for Christmas. This is cuddly toys with things like little microphones and little loudspeakers inside them and little integrated circuits that are Wi-Fi or Bluetooth compatible. And they showed on Points West, GCHQ are pointing this out, that what the Points West reporter was sitting with someone from GCHQ in the room with a couple of these cuddly toys, and the school kids outside on their smartphones were listening into everything they were saying. So these toys actually enable complete strangers to listen into your own home and your conversations and the conversations of your children. Well,
I mean, the CIA were definitely involved in the creation of Facebook and Google so that they can spy on the whole population, as Edward Snowden has revealed. But, of course, the Russian secret services still use typewriters, which are individually checkable, so they keep card index files. Not super Facebook, stuff like this at all.
Facebook poses a potential threat to democracy, says the ex-chief of GCHQ. Robert Hannigan said the social network must be controlled and it must be regulated. It's very easy to say, but in a way, when the mainstream press, the mass media, is extremely so controlled as to come out with a whole load of fake news about weapons of mass destruction and help start an illegal war, surely social media nowadays is almost all we've got.
Well, I think the fact of the matter is people are going to have different opinions about things, and you can't really stop them. And you can go out there and try and, bamboozle them but this secret unit that's been doing this stuff is not supposed to exist, and we're not supposed to know it's there. But they're spending £2 million of our money trying to brainwash us with government propaganda. That would be unacceptable in a real constitutional democracy. Everybody's allowed their opinion, and the government shouldn't be spending money to try and bend people's minds.
So does Facebook pose a potential threat to democracy?
I think what poses a threat to democracy is the oligarchic control of the whole system of communications that we have. The dominance of the media of people like Murdoch and the social media by people like Zuckerberg.
He said that Facebook was not. This is Robert Hannigan. said Facebook was not a fluffy charity providing free services to user, but rather social media firms were trying to squeeze every drop of profit from everyone's personal data. The former intelligence chief was sceptical about whether tech giants could reform themselves and said that new laws would be required. Not that that's a major priority for the present government.
No, the world we're living in is a cacophony of different voices, and one of the problems they've got is they can't control the narratives in the way they used to. People can go online and get alternative sources of information, and that means that the lazy lies that they used to get away with, we may come to discuss what's happened in Strasbourg before the end of the programme, they just push that out there, and of course nowadays people can look into it immediately and start asking questions, whereas in the 1970s we were talking about earlier, they couldn't do that. They have to take years before any of this stuff came out. It's now almost instantaneous, and that does create a problem for the mind managers.
Hint, hint, yes. Let's talk about France now. And first of all, I suppose, look at the Yellow Jackets protest, Martin. There has been very little coverage of what these people are actually demanding. What we hear is it's about taxes, it's about disposable income, it's about the income gap widening. But there is on social media quite a lot circulating of the various demands. One particular picture of a yellow jacket, it's all in French, 25 propositions to sort out the crisis is what it is. I think that's the English translation, where they divide up various demands into work and economy, politics, health and environment and foreign affairs. All sorts of fascinating topics in there. Well, I'll put